Imagine a truth so dangerous, a belief system so defiant that a power-claiming divine authority attempted to wipe it from existence, not merely from the maps, but from the very annals of human memory. What if the history books we meticulously study are missing entire, crucial chapters, chapters deliberately torn out, ritually burned to ash, and buried under centuries of deliberate, chilling silence? This isn't merely about a forgotten religion, a footnote in the grand narrative of faith. This is about a forbidden truth, a spiritual rebellion that dared to challenge the most formidable, unyielding power on earth, the Vatican. This is the harrowing, blood-soaked story of the Cathars, a people relentlessly persecuted for their unwavering beliefs, systematically annihilated by an empire that lived in constant, palpable fear of losing its iron grip on control. It's a history steeped in blood, yet its whispers have traversed through centuries, echoing from the forgotten crumbling castles and the hidden moss-laden caves of southern France, demanding to be heard, to be understood. What precisely made the Cathars so profoundly dangerous? Why did the Church, in its infinite wisdom and absolute power, declare them not just heretics, but outright enemies of the soul, deemed worthy of nothing less than total, absolute annihilation? And what profound, unsettling secrets did their faith purportedly hold that, even in our modern era, continue to defy the official narrative, to challenge the very foundations of accepted history? Prepare yourself, for this is a journey deep into the most obscured, shadowy corners of history, where the lines between what is considered heresy and what might just be truth become chillingly, terrifyingly blurred. The 11th century bore witness to a world in flux, a spiritual landscape ripe for change. While the Pope reigned supreme, an undeniable, undisputed absolute authority from his opulent seat in Rome, meticulously accumulating vast fortunes and wielding unparalleled political and spiritual power, a radically new vision of Christianity began its insidious spread. It moved like wildfire, not born from the grand, towering cathedrals or the pronouncements of powerful cardinals, but rather from the very grassroots of society, fueled by a profound, pervasive spiritual disquiet that permeated the common populace. The Cathars, or Albigensians, as they were also widely known, named after the prominent city of Albi, emerged as a radical counterpoint to the established rigid order. Their very existence was a challenge. Their core belief, deceptively simple yet profoundly revolutionary, centered on a radical duality. For them, the entire physical world, with all its inherent suffering, its inescapable corruption, and its painful impermanence, was unequivocally the creation of an evil force, a malevolent demiurge. Only the spirit, the ethereal, untouchable essence, was considered truly pure, a divine spark tragically trapped within this material prison, this corruptible vessel. This meant that the true benevolent God had nothing to do with the opulent, worldly, and increasingly corrupt Church of Rome. Their spiritual lineage, they believed, was entirely separate, distinct, and pure. They held an equally incendiary belief. Christ, they posited, was not a physical, mortal human being, burdened by flesh and blood, but rather a pure spirit, a divine emissary sent to liberate souls from the corrupt, seemingly endless cycle of reincarnation. This was not merely a subtle theological nuance, a minor point of contention. This was a direct, unyielding assault on the very foundation of the Roman Church's self-proclaimed divine authority. If Christ was not truly human, what then became of the sacred sacraments, the rituals that bound the faithful to Rome? What of the Pope's claimed divine lineage, his unbroken chain of succession from Peter? The entire meticulously constructed edifice of papal power and ecclesiastical hierarchy began to crumble under the sheer weight of this deceptively simple yet monumentally dangerous idea. It threatened to shatter the very bedrock of their dominion. What then made their doctrine so profoundly alluring, so undeniably convincing? so explosively popular among the common folk. They preached in the local vernacular, the everyday language of the people, making their revolutionary message immediately accessible to everyone, not just the Latin-speaking educated elite. They lived lives of stark, unapologetic humility, a profound and glaring contrast to the extravagant, often scandalously lavish lifestyles of the Roman Catholic clergy. This alone drew immense admiration and loyalty, and they openly, defiantly rejected the Catholic sacraments, those meticulously crafted pillars of Roman power that formed the very bedrock of the Church's control over daily life. For the Cathars, there was no need for grand, imposing temples built of stone, for true faith, they asserted, was an intensely internal path, a personal journey of the soul. They vehemently rejected water baptism, seeing it as an unnecessary external ritual that held no power over the soul's true cleansing. They dismissed traditional marriage, viewing it as a binding to the material world and its fleeting pleasures, a distraction from spiritual ascent. The Eucharist, the very body and blood of Christ in Catholic doctrine, held no meaning for them in its literal sense, as they believed Christ's body was never truly physical. And perhaps most controversially, they even scorned the cross itself, seeing it not as a symbol of salvation and divine sacrifice, but as a chilling emblem of torture, a painful reminder of human cruelty and the suffering inherent in the material realm. This was an affront to the very iconography of medieval Christianity. They loudly, unequivocally proclaimed that true Christianity was not to be found in elaborate rituals, in gilded altars, or in imposing stone buildings, but rather in a soul purified through direct knowledge and profound renunciation of the material world. Their spiritual leaders, known reverently as the perfects, or perfecti in Latin, were remarkable individuals, both men and women, who lived lives of extreme asceticism. They abstained rigorously from meat, from all sexual activity, from personal possessions, and crucially from all forms of violence, even in self-defense. This strict adherence to their principles, their absolute commitment to poverty and peace, contrasted sharply with the often greedy and warring secular lords and the corrupt worldly clergy. They were revered by the common people, seen not just as pious individuals, but often as saints, even said to be capable of miracles, their purity a beacon in a morally compromised world. Their unwavering moral example stood in brutal, shocking contrast to the rampant ecclesiastical corruption that plagued the church of the time, where simony, the buying and selling of church offices, nepotism, favoritism granted to relatives, and widespread moral laxity were not just present, but alarmingly commonplace. This seemingly innocuous spiritual spark, igniting in scattered communities across the Languedoc, soon began to glow, then burn, then roar, becoming a direct, undeniable threat to Rome's absolute religious monopoly. The whispers of Catharism, carried by travelers, traders, and itinerant preachers, spreading from village to village, inevitably reached the ears of the most powerful, unyielding throne in the entire Christian world, the papacy. And what they heard, distorted perhaps by fear, misunderstanding, and deliberate misrepresentation, was nothing less than heresy, a heresy so profound, so fundamental, that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of their divinely ordained dominion. Within the hallowed ancient walls of the Vatican, a powerful, self-perpetuating institution built on centuries of accumulated authority and dogma, Catharism was not merely viewed as a simple doctrinal deviation, a minor theological disagreement to be debated and contained through scholarly discourse. It was perceived, with terrifying clarity, as an existential threat. The very foundation of their power rested on the belief in a singular physical Christ, a visible church with a defined hierarchy, and sacraments as the exclusive conduits of divine grace. How could Rome, the self-proclaimed sole guardian of divine truth, the Peter's successor, permit a faith to flourish a faith without priests, without elaborate cathedrals, without the mandatory tithes that funded its vast bureaucracy, without a rigid hierarchy, and most damningly, without the sacraments that bound the faithful to the Church's authority and control, to steal the very souls of the people, to lure them away from the one true path and into a spiritual abyss of self-determination. Pope Innocent III, arguably one of the most powerful and influential figures of the entire Middle Ages, a legal scholar, a political mastermind, and a man of unshakable conviction, was absolutely not one to stand idly by and watch his spiritual empire erode, his temporal authority questioned. He was a visionary, a pragmatist, and utterly ruthless when he felt the Church, in its divine mission, was under direct, fundamental attack. For Innocent III, the Cathars were not merely heretics, errant sheep who had simply strayed. They were deemed enemies of the divine order, disturbers of the fragile political equilibrium of Europe, an unholy affront to his sacred God-given authority, which he believed extended to every corner of Christendom. In his eyes, they were a virulent infection that had to be surgically, decisively extirpated before it consumed the entire body of Christendom, before their dualistic worldview could unravel the very fabric of medieval society. His initial strategy, perhaps surprisingly, was seemingly benevolent, at least on the surface. He dispatched papal legates, eloquent preachers, and learned theologians to the Languedoc region, attempting to convert the Cathars through reasoned argument and persuasive sermons. Among these were future saints like Dominic Guzman, who would go on to found the Dominican order, an order born from the very struggle against Catharism, dedicated to intellectual rigor and preaching. But the Cathars, armed with their fervent faith, their austere lifestyles, and a compelling counter-narrative of spiritual purity, were articulate, passionate, and, for many in the region, far more credible and spiritually pure than the often worldly corrupt emissaries of Rome, whose wealth and hypocrisy often undercut their message. The desired mass conversions did not materialize. On the contrary, the Cathar movement, fueled by this very opposition, continued its unsettling, defiant growth, drawing in more and more adherents from all social strata, from peasants to powerful nobles. It was at this critical juncture, when persuasion had clearly failed, that the Church, with cold pragmatism and a chilling sense of divine mandate, pivoted its strategy. If the word of God, delivered by its appointed messengers, was insufficient to bring these errant sheep back into the fold, then the sword would surely suffice. The turning point, the spark that ignited an inferno that would burn for decades, came in 1208, with the assassination of the papal legate, Pierre de Castelnau. Whether he was killed by a disillusioned Cathar sympathizer, as the Church vehemently claimed, or simply by opportunistic brigands, or even by a disgruntled local lord, remains a subject of intense historical debate, a convenient ambiguity swallowed by the Church's narrative. But regardless of the true culprit, the Church seized upon this event as the perfect, divinely sanctioned excuse for an unprecedented act of aggression. Pope Innocent III wasted no time. He immediately issued a fervent, absolute call to crusade. But this was no ordinary crusade against distant Muslim lands or perceived enemies of Christendom on its borders. This time, the Holy War was directed squarely against Christians on Christian soil, against their own children, their own dissenting flock, an internal enemy deemed more dangerous than any external foe. Thus was born the Albigensian Crusade, a brutal, unprecedented holy war, formally blessed and instigated from the very throne of St. Peter. Its stated objective was the complete, utter extermination of the Cathars and, significantly, any feudal lords who dared to offer them protection or harbor their beliefs. This was not merely a religious conflict, as history often simplifies it. It was a complex, multi-layered struggle that was simultaneously political, economic, and territorial. The south of France, The vibrant and culturally distinct Languedoc region was notably different from the more rigid feudal north. It was a region renowned for its relative freedom, its flourishing Occitan culture, its more tolerant attitudes, and its thriving intellectual openness. A land of sophisticated troubadours and vibrant urban centers, often more decentralized in its governance. Rome coveted this region, seeing it as a loose cannon, a potential nexus of heresy and dissent that threatened the uniformity and control of the papacy across Europe. The Crusade, therefore, provided the perfect, divinely sanctioned pretext for its subjugation, bringing the independent-minded Languedoc firmly under the control of the French crown and, by extension, the papacy. Soon, the knights and barons from the more conservative, aggressive, and often impoverished north descended upon the prosperous Languedoc like a devastating storm, unleashing a wave of destruction and unparalleled cruelty. What followed was an unspeakable massacre, a scorched earth campaign that spared no one, Christian or Cathar, man, woman, or child, in its relentless pursuit of total eradication. The brutality was legendary, leaving a deep, enduring scar on the land and its people that never fully healed, a trauma passed down through generations. Cities were sacked, populations indiscriminately slaughtered, and entire regions laid waste in the name of religious purity and political expediency. The Albigensian Crusade, despite its horrific scope, devastating cities and annihilating countless thousands, proved insufficient to completely extinguish the Cathar spirit. The Cathar seed, as it was grimly called, remained stubbornly alive, rooted deep in the hearts and minds of the populace. Rome, ever pragmatic and utterly relentless in its pursuit of absolute control, understood that brute military force alone, no matter how overwhelming, could not crush a belief system that had taken root in the souls of so many. A more insidious, more pervasive instrument was needed, one that could ferret out dissent in its darkest corners, instill fear in every village and hamlet, and dismantle the very fabric of belief from within. And so, in a chilling stroke of institutional genius, the Church conceived and forged an even more sinister weapon, one that would cast a long, terrifying shadow across European history for centuries to come: the Inquisition. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX formally established the Papal Inquisitorial Tribunal, a judicial body specifically designed to identify, persecute, and punish heresy with an unprecedented zeal and efficiency. The Cathars, naturally, became its primary, relentless target, serving as the proving ground for this terrifying new institution's methods and reach. Monks, meticulously trained and transformed into inquisitors, arrived in the Languedoc. They were armed not with swords, but with the terrifying psychological power of fear, wielding the authority to interrogate, torture, and condemn with little recourse for the accused. Their methods were designed to be utterly comprehensive and psychologically brutal. They would arrive in a town, announce a period of grace for confessions, and then begin their relentless investigations. All it took was a mere suspicion, a single ill-spoken word overheard, an old friendship with a perfect, or even simply a whispered accusation, often fueled by jealousy, greed, or personal vendettas from a neighbor, for an individual to find themselves dragged before the tribunal, their fate sealed, often ending in an agonizing public death by fire at the stake. Confiscation of property, imprisonment, and public shaming were lesser punishments, but the threat of the pyre loomed over everyone suspected of even the slightest deviation. The castles that had once offered sanctuary and protection to the Cathars, like ancient sentinels of defiance, fell one by one, besieged and brutally overwhelmed by Crusader forces and inquisitorial pressure. Montségur, the last iconic bastion of Cathar resistance, a towering symbol of their unwavering defiance against overwhelming odds, finally succumbed in 1244 after a brutal, protracted siege that lasted nearly a year. The fall of Montségur was not merely a military defeat, it was a symbolic apocalypse for the Cathar faith, an event etched into the memory of the region. In a single horrific day, after the fortress surrendered, over 200 Cathars who refused to recant their beliefs were dragged down from the mountain and burned alive in a massive communal pyre at its base, in a field that is still called Prat dels Cremats, the field of the burned. The chilling accounts from chroniclers, some of whom were present, claim they sang as the flames consumed them. They sang not in agony but in triumph, convinced that the fire was not an end but a glorious liberation, freeing their pure souls from the corrupt material world and sending them back to the realm of the true God, a spiritual victory in the face of physical annihilation. The repression was so merciless, so utterly comprehensive, and so brutally efficient that in less than a century, Catharism was practically erased from the map, physically extinguished as an organized movement. Its churches were destroyed, its leaders executed, and its texts systematically burned. But it was not and could not be erased from memory. For even centuries later, the haunting narratives of their bravery, their unshakable faith, and their brutal martyrdom continue to generate profound, uncomfortable questions that echo through time. What if they were right? What if the soul truly needs to be liberated from the material world and its entanglements, rather than submitting to its earthly powers and institutions? And what if the real heresy was not their divergent spirituality, but the silencing of a pure, unblemished spiritual path that refused to serve the earthly ambitions of power and control? A path that valued inner purity above all else? The very completeness of the Church's attempt to erase them only serves to highlight the immense threat they must have posed. Though physically exterminated, their places of worship razed, and their texts burned, the Cathars left an echo that resonates still. It's a haunting presence that survives in the legends whispered through generations, in fragments of hidden texts rediscovered centuries later, in the silent, crumbling ruins of their castles, and most powerfully, in the collective memory of the resilient people of southern France. Their history, which the Church attempted to erase through fire and an enforced silence, transformed instead into a powerful symbol. Today, many people view Catharism not merely as a historical heresy, but as a profound spiritual rebellion, a courageous attempt to reclaim a more intimate, a purer, a truly free faith, unshackled from the suffocating control of rigid worldly institutions. It was an early cry for individual spiritual freedom that continues to inspire. For some, the Cathars were the first true Christians, preserving an original, uncorrupted message that predated the Church's earthly ambitions. For others, they were simply martyrs of an inconvenient truth, sacrificed on the altar of institutional power and control. The Church, for its part, rarely speaks of them. It has not canonized them, nor has it ever publicly acknowledged or rehabilitated their memory. In this profound, enduring silence, perhaps there lies a tacit, unspoken recognition of a profound sin, a historical injustice that has never truly been redeemed. And so, the Cathar flame, though physically extinguished in the flesh, continues to burn brightly in spirit. It flickers in every doubt that dares to rise against rigid dogma, in every personal search for the sacred, in every soul that, when confronted by overwhelming power, chooses to follow its own conscience, its own inner light, regardless of the cost. High in the rugged, windswept mountains, where the wind howls with untamed fury and the mist often obscures ancient pathways, stood the ultimate refuge of the Cathars, the formidable Château de Montségur. For many, it was far more than a mere fortress. It was a sanctuary, a sacred temple, a beacon of desperate hope in a darkening world. Here, the last of the perfects gathered alongside their most devoted followers, ready to face their destiny. The final brutal siege began in 1243. For months they resisted, their dwindling numbers sustained more by their unshakable faith than by meager provisions. The Crusaders knew this place was not merely a strategic military position. It was the symbolic heart, the very soul of Catharism. If Montségur fell, then the soul of the heresy they believed would fall with it. The Cathars resisted with unwavering determination, praying, fasting, meditating, bracing for the inevitable. Some chroniclers even claim they experienced visions, prophesying the ultimate downfall of the corrupt material world and the triumph of the spirit. For them, death was not an end, but a glorious liberation, a final triumphant escape from the earthly prison. The closer defeat loomed, the more convinced they became that their martyrdom would serve as a seed, a foundation for a future spiritual awakening, a testament to their enduring truth. In March 1244, after their valiant surrender, they were offered a final grim chance. Pardon if they would only recant their faith and embrace Roman Catholicism. Not a single one did. Over 200 Cathars descended from the castle, choosing their principles over life, and were burned alive in a gigantic pyre. They did not resist. They sang. They sang as the flames devoured their flesh. They sang perhaps because they knew their message, their truth would not die, that in some forgotten corner of time, someone someday would tell their story. And here we are, centuries later, still haunted by their song. Despite their physical extermination, many enigmas continue to surround Catharism even today, fueling ongoing fascination and scholarly debate. There are those who contend that their deeper knowledge concealed profound esoteric truths, passed down from ancient Gnostic traditions, that they guarded sacred relics beyond physical description, apocryphal texts that offered a different narrative of Christian origins, or even astounding secrets about Christ that the Church vehemently wished to remain hidden from the light of public scrutiny. Some theories even link the Cathars directly to the legendary Holy Grail, not as a physical cup, but as a powerful symbol of pure knowledge, of inner illumination, a hidden spiritual lineage that preserved a secret wisdom. Others assert that a portion of their profound wisdom was hidden before the fall of Montségur, meticulously buried in some secret cave in the Pyrenees, patiently awaiting rediscovery by those pure of heart and intent. There are even those who believe that Catharism never truly disappeared, that its core ideas, cleverly disguised, were reborn centuries later in various Gnostic movements, in the esoteric traditions of the Freemasons, in the Rosicrucians, and in countless new spiritualities that continue to defiantly challenge the rigid dogma of established religion, suggesting an unbroken chain of hidden knowledge. Myth? Reality? The line becomes exquisitely blurred when history itself has been deliberately written with fire and systematic censorship, when the victors control the narrative entirely. Though they were physically eradicated, the Cathars left an indelible mark on the collective memory of southern France. The haunting songs of the troubadours, the enduring legends of the mist-shrouded mountains, the profound silences that echo within the ancient ruins, all still speak of them, a silent testament to their unwavering spirit. Catharism was a powerful cry for spiritual freedom, a silent but unyielding rebellion against the oppressive dominion of the powerful, an undeniable heresy in the eyes of Rome. Yes, but also a profound proposal, a fervent call to look inward, to seek the divine in the intimate depths of the soul, not in gilded altars or imposed structures. Today, countless pilgrims continue to trace the footsteps of the Cathars, journeying through their crumbling castles, meditating in their hallowed ruins, asking themselves what humanity truly lost with their brutal extermination. For perhaps, amidst those consuming flames, not only lives were extinguished, but a radically different, purer possibility of understanding God, of connecting with the divine directly, was forever silenced. Today, the Cathars are remembered not merely as condemned heretics, but as enduring symbols of spiritual resistance. Their story is an open wound in the memory of Christianity, a stark, chilling warning of what can occur when absolute power becomes utterly terrified of losing its control, of its dominion over the very souls of humankind. Their timeless message, buried under centuries of ash and silence, still resonates within the ancient, weathered walls of the Languedoc castles, and more profoundly in the hearts of all who seek a faith unburdened by chains, unfettered by dogma, and free from the dictates of earthly power. For history is not always, as they say, written solely by the victors. Sometimes the defeated merely hide their truth better, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the shadows. The fire that consumed them was not merely punishment, it was, in its own horrifying way, a revelation. In their final, defiant songs, in their peaceful, resolute surrender to death, they left an eternal message to the world, that truth needs no temples, no armies, no indulgences. It needs only souls willing to live with absolute coherence, even if it costs them their very lives. And then the ultimate question must be asked: who truly was the heretic? The one who dies for their unwavering faith, or the one who kills in the name of God?